I was recently talking to a couple that had not been around their core family recently since they've gone through the connection codes and really changed how they are parenting their children. And they were sharing with me a large level of fear in going back into spaces where other people handle their kids very differently than how they are now communicating and helping their children process intense emotion and situations. And they were just like, man, this is really hard. How can I create safe spaces for my kids with other people? And so we have today with us Echo Hill Vetter. She has been on our podcast several times, Dr. Glenn and Phyllis's daughter, and she is going to be sharing how she has created safe spaces for her kids with our amazing certified coach and friend, Bridget Blood, and just sharing stories of how they have cultivated an environment of safety for children, for Echo's kids, and what that can look like for you as well. So that is where we are headed today. Welcome to the Connection Codes podcast. This is the podcast where we break open our emotions that take us from being disconnected to connected in our relationships and in ourselves. I'm your host, Tera Wages, and joining me today is trauma-informed, certified coach, Connection Codes lead coach, Echo Hill Vetter, and certified Connection Codes coach, Bridget Blood. We are sharing the foundation of the Connection Codes, which is the guide to human connection, and we are so glad you are here. Usually Dr. Glenn and Phyllis are here. So if this is your first time listening, usually our founders are on the podcast and they like to start with hello world. And I don't know how to get my brain to click over when I don't hear that initially. So I just want to start out by saying I'm so honored and glad to have y'all here on this podcast. Anytime we have, especially I just have a heart for moms and for women that are helping love children. It means the world to us and sharing your stories. And so I would love to hear what y'all been experiencing. Help me be a better mom too, and cultivating safety for my kids. And so thank y'all for being here.
Glad to be here.
Do you want to start? Or I have a thought, if you're okay with me.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, amazing. So when you said cultivating, I can't remember the word you used, community, just people for your children to be with other than you, who are interacting with them in a way that you are now interacting with them. So using the connection codes, basically, with our kids, which in essence means regarding our kids, right? Giving them a voice, treating them like a real person. And the first thought that came to mind was we are working to include other people in their lives, other adults in their lives. Bridget is an incredible connection coder. And so to have her support and to have her in our home interacting with our kids is such a gift. I'm even learning things from the way she interacts. And so it's so wonderful. At the same time, they also still interact with a lot of adults who are not connection coders. Right. They go to school. Yeah. No one at their school, for the most part, is a connection coder, right? Yeah. However, because we've been doing this for a while and it's their normal now, so what they expect is to receive respect, right? The way that they interact with other humans and then the way they expect to be treated is respectfully. And so when they are in a situation, even with other adults, where the adult is disrespectful to them, it feels weird. And it doesn't mean that they're then disrespectful back, because we talk about that too. Just because someone's disrespectful to you doesn't mean that's permission or a green light for you to be disrespectful to them. But it does feel weird to them. And I'm so glad that it feels weird to them. So they will, I pick them up from school, they get in the car. Well, so-and-so teacher said such and such, and they don't understand it. Why are they talking to us that way? Why are they treating us like that? And then what do we do about it? And so the fact that it stands out to them, the fact that it feels yucky, the fact that it feels weird, feels important. So yes, we are trying to grow our circle. I don't want the only adult connection coders they interact with to be my husband and I. Yeah. I want them to see it from other people. We don't live in a cave. We don't live in a hole. They're still interacting with a lot of other people. But they are noticing and even saying, that's not right.
Yeah.
The way that teacher treats that kid, that's not right.
Mm.
And the fact that they know that,
Yeah,
if we could have all kids knowing that, right?
Yeah.
And work to change the cycle that way, where kids are, first of all, aware, and second of all, at times willing to speak up. That's not always an option. I mean, you picture a classroom setting, it's not always an option to speak up. But third of all, willing to share with another adult. The fact that they bring it home and talk about it feels huge. And then, of course, hopefully at some point, that ripple begins to change the way all adults interact with humans, or at least more adults interact with small humans. So,
yeah. And so I know that y'all have a few examples even of what this has looked like in y'all's interaction and with each other, with your kids. And so can you share what that actually looks like in action? Especially I love hearing from Bridget as well about that, because like I interact with my neighbors' kids. Like we really are living in community with each other. And as a parent of kids that are figuring this out, this emotional processing, it is kind of scary for me and I am hesitant to take them into environments where they could be disrespected by an adult, or they may not understand that I let my kids have a voice. Ooh. So now this adult thinks that my kid is a bad kid because they actually use their voice.
Right.
And so that is even scary to me. So show me what it can look like for me to have this in my life.
Where do we want to start?
well, I would love to hear, to me, the shorts story that you had with my, I think at the time, 4-year-old is such a brilliant example of an adult allowing a child to have autonomy, agency, to have a voice. So I would love to hear that one from you. I think you have to be closer to the mic.
You got to kiss it.
That feels,
Yes.
but that feels like a great place to start. It even inspired me the way you talked about your interaction with
That's
her
so
at that time.
Yeah. So we were getting ready to go to the playground and had all the kiddos with me. And so I was like, hey, you're wearing a skirt. And I asked her, I said, what feels good to your body? We're going to go to the playground. Would you like to put shorts on? She's like, no, I want to keep my skirt. And I said, okay, you can keep your skirt, but can I suggest that maybe we put some shorts on underneath it? And she's like, no, I'm good. So there was this moment where I was like, do I bring an extra pair of shorts with me? But then it is that balance of like, I'm not her mom. And so how do I navigate this? But I'm like, you know what? We're just going to go with it. So we get out of the driveway and we're almost to the main road. And all of a sudden in the back seat, I hear this, uh-oh, Bridget, I have a skirt on. And I was like, yes, you do have a skirt on. So I like stopped the car and I said, well, what do you need? I was like, do you need to go back to the house and get shorts? And she was silent for a second. And I said, I'm like, I can turn back around if you'd like me to do that. And obviously as the adult, I do experience some frustration of, I wish you would have listened or I wish I would have went with my gut and just brought it with me. But I want to make sure that I'm creating environments for children in my life. Or I call them like my mini BFFs, right? That they have the right over their own body, that they have the right to change their mind. And so I said, we turned around, we went back to the house and we went and we had an incredible time at it. And there was, I think, just so much of, I feel sadness as a woman who's not yet a mother, that I'm already programmed to go, the way to get your kid to change is to let her feel the shame of not feeling like her body was safe to play and move. Like that will teach her. It's like, no, that will teach her to shut down in environments in the future where she goes, I actually don't feel comfortable sharing my body this way, but I have no other way to do it. So I have to do it anyway. Compared to, hey, I missed it with my body. You know, someone else that had more responsibility than me gave me an option. I said no to that option, but then I had the right to change my mind. And she did. And we went on and it was like an extra, 6 minutes of my whole life. Like that 6-minute difference sets her up for success in the future, that she continuously has that body autonomy of my body belongs to me. Even when I miss it with my body, I can come back and I will be regarded. So and good. Just even you said that of, I think I have fear of caretakers hearing when you give your children a voice, they become disrespectful. And I was like, actually, no, they just learn a worldview that says, I get to exist here. I have the right to exist here. And I can give a no that is honoring, even if it's still my no. But I think so much of us, we don't even know how to have our own sacred no. And so I think that there's just part of it. And so that was just one of those beautiful moments of play and fun. And we had such a good time after that. And there was even a moment while we were playing in the playground where she slipped. And I was just like, oh. And I watched her and I said, hey, checking in with you. How's your body doing? And she's like, oh, I'm good. And she was down the slide and back up and all over again. But it was the like, would that, and again, I don't know, but would that moment have been the same if she didn't feel safe in her body? Would she have felt the strength? Oh, I'm like, would she have had that experience? I don't know, but I'm grateful that she did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that so much. I don't want to interrupt you okay. Because as a mom, and if there's mom listening or grandparents or people that interact with kids very often, it's my struggle. It's my own shame that it would have hit me in that moment in the car.
Yep.
And I would have reacted to her. So I would be like mad at myself for not bringing the shorts. And typically, because I am in the mother role of, after that playground, we probably have other things we got to get done.
Yep.
I need to go to the grocery store. I need to get, like, you're lucky we're going to the playground to begin with.
Right.
I allotted 30 minutes for this, so to turn back around. And so my issue is that I get so angry at myself in that moment that I didn't listen to what I thought would need to happen.
Yeah.
That now I am responding to my kids.
Yeah.
I'm making it be their fault. Well, you should have grabbed shorts when I told you to, when I'm the adult. And so I think that is where we miss so often. And it's beautiful to have other people in our lives that we get to see that don't have the same type of pressure with our kids, to be like, oh, yeah, that 6 minutes actually saved probably 30 minutes of time. I had an interaction with my daughter this week that she was feeling some intensity, and it was like the morning rush of getting them out the door and on the bus by a certain time. And I was trying to help her process. And I was like, well, what's happening with you? And she's like, which, it's under my skin so good. And later that night, I was like, sis, like I was trying to give you space to process. Yeah. She was like, well, I felt like I didn't have time to process, and I was like, something I have learned is if I actually slow down, as Dr. Glenn says, slower is faster. Spending that 6 minutes to turn the car around probably actually saved you so much time in the long run. And I think we just forget that. So I love that you gave her that voice to do that.
I love that Bridget often brings it back to the body, like how it's like she remembers that and is aware of that. And I often forget, but to literally ask our kids, how's your body doing? How are you feeling in your body? And because so much of what we talk about in connection codes, in processing emotion, in having self-awareness, we're embodied creatures. Yeah. And so what's happening in your body, and to teach our kids so that they don't have the gap between, I'm 9 months old, I know exactly what's happening in my body. And now I'm 29 and I have no idea what's happening in my body, so that they don't have that gap, so that they're able to just hang on to that original design of knowing what's happening in the body so that we can meet the needs of the body, that we could be able to raise a generation that doesn't have the gap where they then have to relearn it at 30 or 40 or 50. Yeah. And one of the ways we do that, and in that way, I am inspired by her language, and in hearing her interact with my kids, it's always a reminder of like, oh, right, I want my kids to know what's happening in their body. I want them to know what the need is. And that way they don't have to relearn it when they turn 30 or 40 or 50 and then deal with all the harm that happened in the meantime because they weren't tuned in to what was happening in their bodies. So that's one of the many ways that I feel inspired by her language and by the way that she interacts with my kids. It's such a gift and such a good reminder for me.
Yeah. And I also love, because this is a side note, but if you've listened to our recent podcast, Dr. Glenn on podcast 111, he talks about how as girls and as women, we are discouraged, like early on, how we're taught about our body just determines how we show up sexually later. Yes. And so I even love in that situation, you're like, would you prefer to have shorts on? And she said no initially. And you weren't like, no, you need to put shorts on because you need to cover yourself. You let that be her decision. And you fully respected what her needs were. There was no shame in it for her. And then she decided when like, oh no, I actually do prefer to have shorts on. And so even that element of it, you're planting seeds for future girl to know like what her body needs without the shame of anything. So that's a side note, but that was just a beautiful way to give her full autonomy of her body without shame or fear or anything else from the adult. You didn't tell her what she needed. You let her decide. And I love that.
Yeah, definitely a side note, because we are the parent. And like you're saying, we do have 100 things that we are juggling at all times, or even as caregivers sometimes as well, where oh, wow, the next thing is this, and I have to factor that in. I mean, that happens for caregivers too. And because there are going to be moments where turning around wasn't an option.
Yeah.
Where, well, I'm trying to get this kid to practice on time, and then that kid's going to be late if I regard this kid's need to go back and get shorts. And so then you as the adult have to discern, what do I do here, right? Like either way, someone suffers. So how do I choose who misses out in this moment, right? So what I was picturing is that is going to happen if you have more than one child, especially in your care. And then if the answer was no, as in there's not time to turn back, allowing them to express their pain, allowing them to express their disappointment or frustration or embarrassment, and just oohing them and being with them while they process that, and not punishing or resisting, that they then have to process the emotion of, I missed it. I needed shorts. I didn't do the shorts thing. Now I'm freaking out. And to just be present with them in that, and that sometimes is going to be the outcome. So sometimes the outcome as the adult is to discern and go, I have 6 minutes. We have 6 minutes. And then sometimes the outcome is we don't have 6 minutes. And so now we just have to process the pain of, you got to wear the skirt because we can't go home.
Yes. Yes.
And so to remember both, whichever happens, if you have the time, certainly regard the need, certainly. And if you don't, regard the emotion about not being able to regard the need.
Yeah. That's not disrespectful. I think that's really important, is when your children, so much shame that I'm never close enough to speak about. When children have an emotional response to your no, that is seen through the lens of that's being disrespectful and not obeying the parent or the caregiver or the adult, compared to, the one with the most responsibility, the adult in the room, does have to say a no that protects the whole group.
Yep.
But they have every right to not like your answer.
Yeah.
Now that, obviously there's gonna be boundaries on that. Doesn't mean you get to, punch or kick or whatever, but it does mean that if there's a big reaction of anger in their body, to be like, I hear your anger. I feel a lot of sadness that we can't turn around right now, or we can't do this thing, but that your child having an emotional response to your no, that in and of itself is not disrespecting or disregarding you as the adult in the room.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and one of the things we talk about a lot and have shifted in dramatically, because we have a 19-year-old and then we have a 7-month-old. So our parenting has changed a lot in these last 19 years, and definitely started off more with the mindset of, what is it, like obey and do it with a good attitude?
Yeah. I know.
That was where we started.
Yeah.
So much pain, lots of repair needed for that. And we're still repairing. And now, that makes me think of the story, I think she was 4, because it was fairly recently, and where she wanted to grill a sandwich on the stove, on the hot pan by herself. And it was a super sweet endeavor. Like, she wanted to make a sandwich and give it to her brother. She heard, she's always listening. She hears everything. And she heard him expressing, I guess, that he was hungry or that he wanted a sandwich. Who knows what he was talking about. But she hears this. And so she's like, ooh, I can make the sandwich, right? But we're all home. And then someone realizes that that's her intent, is to go get sandwich things and turn on the stove and make a sandwich for him, a hot sandwich. So the answer to that was no. The answer was, she's 4 years old and we don't feel safe with her grilling a sandwich on a hot stove by herself. And she was absolutely devastated. And I won't now remember all the exact wording, but her reaction got so escalated. It's safe to say I've never seen her so upset. The volume that came out of her mouth, her tears, her body looked like it was going to explode into a million pieces. She was not just yelling, but shrieking, like so elevated. And of course, in 15 years ago, that would have been absolutely unacceptable. You are never allowed to lose your mind like that. And now understanding emotion and what's happening in the body, and that emotions happen to you, and that she's releasing this intensity that's happening on the inside of her.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of a side note, but basically our kids are going to experience what they experience. So we have two options. They can experience it alone in isolation, either in isolation here by holding it all in and pretending, or in isolation by pushing them away, right? Sending them to timeout, sending them to their room, closing the door. You are not allowed to be here. I will not be with you. So the two options are they do it alone or they do it with us. Those are the two options. And it is safer together. Always, always, always safer together. For me to be with her in the emotion is going to be safer than her being isolated in her emotion or having to pretend that she's not experiencing that emotion. So you can see her little body, like all her muscles are rippling and she's screaming and shrieking, I want to make the sandwich. I want to make the sandwich. And she even gets to the point, which she, again, I don't think I've ever seen this in her. She starts saying things like, I hate this family. I want a new family. I wish I lived somewhere else. I wish I lived at a different house. I wish I had a different family. Like, and it's just spewing. It's not that she's like stopping to think about what she's saying. It's just spewing out of her mouth. She says, I want to rip everything up. I want to rip up all my clothes. I want to rip up that sandwich. Because what ended up happening is that her dad either made the sandwich or helped her make the sandwich. Oh, and so then the sandwich is made, but then she wants to rip up the sandwich. And, I mean, it's hard not to laugh. Because she's so cute. So, of course, I'm trying to keep a straight face and just be in the pain with her here, regard her pain. But what I noticed is, and we talk about this a lot with emotion, the waves of emotion, right? So it peaks. And because I didn't resist her energy, because I oohed her, she didn't harm anyone. She didn't break anything. She did release a lot of energy out of her mouth. But nothing was broken. She didn't lash out. She didn't attack anybody.
She didn't rip her clothes.
She did not rip her clothes or anything else in the house, but she peaked with what was coming out of her mouth. And then she just melted into sobs, racking sobs. And she crawled into my lap and she curled into a ball, like the fetal position. And she just disappeared into me for at least several seconds, maybe several minutes. I can't remember now. And then she basically took a big shuddering breath and it was over. And that was that. And we were all good to go. And one thing to remember, in that moment when she is saying, I hate this family, I hate everything, I hate this house, I hate this home. It would be so easy to get on that train with her and think that she means it or to feel hurt by it or to feel offended by it. She doesn't say those things when she's regulated, right? And if you had a conversation with her when she's regulated, she's never going to say that she hates me or that she hates our family. And it felt like in the moment, there was such a connection codes filter for me on that of, oh, she's experiencing intense emotion and it's just coming out of her mouth. That's what's happening here. That I actually felt zero pain. And that was interesting because I think if that had happened 15 years ago, I would have taken it personally. I would have felt like I'm failing as a parent. I would have thought she meant it. I would have thought certainly that she's being disrespectful and disobedient, like so much judgment on the experience versus, oh, this is just emotion. This is just energy coming out of her mouth so that she can crest and then re-regulate, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. So that was interesting too, that I didn't feel dysregulated by her dysregulation was one of those moments of just like, whoa, that would not have happened 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Like I would have been losing my own mind if that was happening with her.
Right. And I'm not there yet, Echo. I've not graduated. I'm trying real hard and I'm better than where I was. Yeah. For sure. Like I think back, I would give every dollar that I've ever made to reparent my oldest child. Wow. Like literally take my home, take everything. Like I'm trying not to cry about it to reparent my oldest child. Yeah. It goes like, it's okay to cry. Because it is so painful. And now, because she was 7 to 8, probably closer to 8 when we actually started using connection codes for her versus just Wes and I. Yeah. So that was just 2 years ago. Wow. And so now those moments where she is, and my oldest 2 are coming at me. That's what I did to them for the first 7 to 8 years of their life. And I get so dysregulated still. I mean, there are moments that I can ride it with them. But it is, I don't do a good job not resisting their energy. I resist, especially my oldest, continuously. And I think it's because I have so much fear of like, are you just going to be a bad kid? Because she's the oldest, you know, like, and I want you to be respectful. I want you to be grateful and kind and look at everything I've given you. And it is such a pain experience when I feel like I'm met with negativity or any kind of resistance. And so to see you and how you parent and then have people in your home that are guiding your children in the same way, I'm like, how do I get there? How do I graduate to that? And I feel guilt that I'm butting into y'all's conversation. But I feel like parents are listening and they're like, "Ooh, my house is chaos." You know, like how do we get to that point? Yeah. And knowing the damage that we're creating is just so painful for us.
Can I share?
Please.
This morning when I walked in the house.
Yeah.
You were like, I'm not going to apologize to you. The house is a mess, but I want you to know it's really hard for me.
Yeah.
And I think I just want to honor the like bravery as parents to let single anybody, but as a right, like what right do I have to help care for children as a not parent? I think that's a very like social pressure I feel as a single person of like, how are you going to help me with parenting? But then yet again, yesterday, my best friend called me with a parenting mishap that she experienced with one of her children. And she said, I'm feeling really flooded. Can you help me process through this? Because it is a human experience, like losing identity, giving correction, disregarding someone's energy. Like, yes, you're talking about it with your child, but that interaction happens in the human experience. And so I think there's a bravery of letting other people into your life to see your messy house, to see your kids lose their mind, to watch you miss it and not handle it. Like there's that space of, that doesn't mean everybody gets that, but I think being able to even have the bravery to ask for help of like, would you be willing to pick up my kids a couple days after? Because I feel so much identity and partnership in the like, it feels so good to me to give into that. And I don't have an expectation that the house has to be perfect or that your children have to be perfectly behaved or that you have to always respond with the perfect connection code, language all of the time. But I think that's a conversation to have with people in your life of like, who are the friends that you have in your life that may have space, but to risk that conversation. Hey, I feel some fear asking this of you. I don't want to assume that you have time. Would you mind coming and hanging out? Or, we've got the soccer game. Do you want to come to the soccer game? Even things like that. Even if you don't invite another caretaker into your home of like, would you want to come to my kid's soccer game? We're going to get ice cream together as a family. Would you want to come along? As a single person in that experience, risking I'm going to keep asking. I know when we first started our friendship, there were several times in the beginning where I kept asking to hang out and you were like, oh, I have to say no. And I was like, oh, I feel fear that you're going to feel disregarded by me by saying no. And I was like, as long as you're okay with me keeping asking you, I'm just going to keep asking to show up. Yeah. But I think that there's that space too of, again, I think, so much of what you talk about as far as the way we've been indoctrinated to build family, it is very countercultural to say, I can go build a family in a new city. I'm in a new city. None of my relatives live here. And I've had to build that, but I've had to risk that conversation of like, is there a space for me at this table? And so I think there's both as far as the parent asking for help and then as the extra adults in the room to say, hey, can I just show up? And it doesn't have to be pretty. I want to just hang out and be at the soccer game or whatever it is.
I think what's unfortunate is that you're rare. I say that like as a positive. I have so many friends in my life. I had lunch with someone not long ago and she was talking about someone else's kids. And she's like, man, her kids are wild. And I thought, oop, noted. Wow. My kids aren't safe with you. You can't come to my house. Like, and she's never been to my home before, but like, ooh, I have 3 boys. And then like my kids are wild and we let them show emotion and they wrestle each other and they just have a lot of energy. I love Echo that you talk a lot about energy and energy exchange. And so I was like, ooh, not safe.
Yeah.
And I have very, very few people in my life that I feel are safe for my children.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know if I would fill up my hand for the amount of people that I feel are safe with my children. As far as my children being able to show up as their authentic selves and not have a judgment placed on them. And you know what? I may not even be one of them. I may not even be one of them. Like, I judge my children for how they show up in the world a lot of times. And so, I don't know. I think that this conversation around future generations and what we as a society, both as mothers, as friends, as a culture of adults leading this next group of tiny and mid-sized humans, of like, what are we teaching them, and are we creating safety for them to grow up and live an emotionally like connected life, you know? So
I mean, I can get all kinds of passionate about. I think that it's important that we're doing the work cross-generationally, as in with our peers, that we as adults are doing our work, right? To become more self-aware, to become more emotionally intelligent. But I also believe that the hope for our future is in our children. It's in allowing them to grow up this way. It's in creating environments for them, because they're the ones who are going to really change things. We're going to do our part. We're going to keep trying. We're going to keep chucking. But they're the ones who are going to really change things. Yeah. And so if we can create this environment for them, they're not going to accept less than the best, you know?
Yeah.
They're not going to know any different. Like, it's going to be the world that they live in. And so it's going to be what they show up with. I think that's why I keep coming back to, I want to talk about parenting or not just parenting, but caregiving. Yeah. I want to talk about how adults are treating children. We could just talk about that. And that would be the thing that would change everything. Because I can't remember if you've said this yet, but we've talked about this. Whatever judgments I'm placing on my children, I'm first placing them on myself.
Yes.
It's what's happening inside of me.
Yes.
And so if I'm judging myself harshly, if I'm expecting perfection or gratitude at all times, no matter what, if I'm expecting self-control at all times, no matter what, for me, that's what I'm going to expect from them, even when they're 2 and literally don't have the capacity for self-control, right? Yeah. They haven't developed to be able to have self-control yet at 0 and 1 and 2. But if I'm expecting that from myself at all times, I'm going to expect that from them, whether it's reasonable to or not.
Yeah.
And so much, in my experience, so much of interacting with small humans is a mirror for, well, what do I believe about me? And what do I believe about humans in general? And they make it really clear because they won't follow the rules, right? Yeah. Like, we've created all these social rules, whether they're good and beneficial or not, they exist. And so we are much more likely as adults to try to abide by those, even to our own detriment, even to our own self-betrayal. I will follow the rules no matter what, no matter how much it harms me. I will follow the rules, right? Yeah. Kids aren't like that. They haven't gotten that message yet. So they're still connected to need. Yep. They're still connected to emotion. They're still connected to their bodies. And they're going to let you know that until we condition them to stop telling us and to stop tuning in. And then they're just going to fall in line like we have. And then at 30, 40, 50, they have to undo or try to repair the harm that we are now trying to repair for ourselves. It's like when I look at my children, I'm looking at who I was at 7 months old, at 5 years old, at 10 years old, at 12 years old, at 16 years old, at 19 years old, right? Yeah. Every interaction I have with my kids, I'm looking at myself at that time in my life. And it does ask a lot of me. It asks me, it invites me to say, well, is that a belief worth holding on to? Is that a beneficial belief? Is that a beneficial norm? Is that something that I want them to comply with and conform to? Did that benefit me? Is that benefiting my peers? Did that benefit my spouse when he was a 16-year-old boy? Did that help him? How are we doing now? What harm are we having to repair now? And it changes the way I interact with him. But that takes work, right? It takes intentionality. However, I would say, and this is where it comes back to community, if we can just find one other person doing this work, it strengthens our resolve. It helps our process. It ensures, like what you were saying with the fear, I totally get the fear. I relate to the fear. And what I would say, though, about that is the longer I do this, the less fear I feel. So now having a 19-year-old, a 16-year-old, now having done this for, I think, 7 or 8 years, that fear begins to kind of dissolve because I'm seeing so much fruit, so much good fruit. Am I seeing good fruit as in I have like these perfect cookie cutter children? No. But I also am at a point in this process that I don't want cookie cutter children. I want the children I want them to be real whole people who are able to say, whoa, pain, sad, shame. Mom, that hurts. When you say that to me, that hurts. I want the kids who are doing that. Not, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. In fact, we even joke about it in our home. And forgive me, this may sound disrespectful, but with the yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And it's arbitrary, or I don't know if arbitrary is the right word. If that's valuable to you, great. It's not valuable to me and my kid, but they'd say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am to everyone at school, right? Because that's what's expected at school. And so one of my kids came home this past week and said, would you rather us say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, when because they usually just say, yeah, or yes, or whatever. And I was like, no, that feels weird. And they're like, okay. But checking in, because that's what they're hearing in a different environment of, well, that's what my teacher insists. If I ever say yes or yeah, she corrects me. And so why don't you do that? What's happening with that? So just little things that they have started to notice in ways that we interact differently. And that one I think is a neutral. For the most part, it's a neutral, but different ways where they're like, we don't do that at our house, or you don't demand that of us, or you don't expect that of us. Or even, of course, for example, oh my word, my 5-year-old, so she's in preschool, but she will be in kindergarten next year. And her teachers keep telling her, or not her, the class, because of course they're all 4 and 5, they're still very expressive. And the teachers keep saying, when you go to kindergarten, you're going to have to stop crying because these kids cry all the time. And so their teachers are trying to prepare them you're going to the big school, you got to get it together, right? But of course, my kids are hearing it's okay to cry. It's healthy to cry. It's good to cry. And so my kid comes home going, they keep telling us that we're going to have to stop crying. It makes no sense to her. Because grown-ups cry, teenagers cry. So why in the world would we in kindergarten have to stop crying? It makes no sense. But anyway, I could go on and on. Those are tangents. But the idea being, let's create a different normal. Let's create a normal where is respect important? Yes. Is expression important? Yes. Is saying, Mom, I feel hurt when you say that to me important? Yes. And allowing ourselves to be whole humans, even when we're 2 and 5 and 12 and 15.
I love that. That's what I was thinking about, the whole human situation. I remember when my daughter was, a little baby, 9 months old, in the little carrier going into a restaurant. And they're like, oh, 2.5. And I'm like, she's not half a person, no, she's a whole person, and
she exists. And she's real.
I think we have that mentality of our kids are not humans, they're not whole humans, and we treat them that way and we expect them, while also setting a precedent on how they behave that even as adults, we don't hold ourselves to the same standard.
Absolutely.
I had a babysitter a few years ago call me. My son had yelled at her. She was like, you got to come and get him. She was really upset. I ended up watching the video footage and saw that she had left my kids in a very unsafe environment. And I called her and I was like, hey, you shouldn't be babysitting. This was very, very unsafe. I was respectful. Well, her mom called me later that night and chewed me out.
Oh, pain.
And I was like, ooh, wow. She was just talking about how bad my kids were. I was like, you're upset because my 4-year-old yelled at your daughter, but yet you as a 45-year-old think it's okay to yell at me?
Wow.
At what age do we get to yell at each other? And why do we expect the smaller humans
to do better than
what we're doing? Myself included. Wes and I constantly remind ourselves of that, of dude, she is upset with you or he is upset with you and they're yelling at you, but you're yelling back. Why is it okay for you to do it, but not okay for them to? So I think that is just, our kids are whole humans. They need space to express and feel their emotion with safe people. We need to bring people into their circle that can honor their body and ask them those questions. And so I think that for me, before we go into this core emotion wheel, I want our listeners to ask yourself, am I a safe person? Not just for my kids, but for my friends' kids? Am I showing up in spaces where I am helping support the future of children? You know, whether it's at my family cookout with my nieces and nephews, or in a church environment, or my neighborhood playground, when I see a kid push another kid, am I placing judgment on the kid pushing? Right. Am I saying that's a bad kid? Or am I recognizing like, oh, they need extra support? They need someone to like follow their energy and find out what's happening for them. How am I as the adult showing up in these children's lives? Yeah. And so I think that that is just such an important question that we ask ourselves in every role, because we're all around kids all the time, you know? And so how do we show up in those spaces and help our children be whole humans?
Yeah.
So we are going to go into our core emotion wheel, which this is the 4-minute tool that Dr. Glenn and Phyllis created to help us process and identify our emotions. And while I still struggle resisting my children's energy, this tool is our key to repair continuously. Yeah. This is the reason, oh my gosh, it has changed the dynamic in my children's lives to where when we miss with each other, we come back to this every time. And it gives me so much hope for the future. Yeah. And so would y'all like to do the wheel?
Sure.
Okay.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Oh, I'm not supposed to touch it.
Are we doing this specifically about parenting? Or just...
You can do what's happening for you. Right. Yep.
Either way.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, parenting is definitely on my mind. All my kids are on my mind. So I'm going to probably stick with that. Although the first thing that came to mind with anger isn't my kids specifically, but when I am out in public and I see adults mistreating kids in a way that's completely socially acceptable, so much anger. I never know how to handle it. I never know whether to speak up or not. Tons of pain. So actually I'll jump around to hurt too. I feel so much deep empathy for the tiny human who's being disrespected by the big human, that my body will physically hurt. So hurt and sad, but lots of anger too, of just like feeling that energy rise up in my body when I see that happen. Lonely. It is lonely. I've been feeling this a lot lately, especially with school, of like, I want to get connection codes to our school. I want all of these teachers and staff members to understand these ideas and to be able to interact with these kids who need it so bad. They need this, of course, at home, but they need it at school. They need to hear and see adults interacting with them in this way at school. They're at school for so many hours every day. Yeah. So lots of lonely there. Like, I want this language in more places that I am in so that I can share these types of interactions, and so that my kids can too. Some fear, I still feel low level fear because we are doing things different than the culture around us. And I don't want it to fail. I don't want, I want to do right by my kids. And so there are times where I get hit with fear of like, am I missing something? Are we doing right by them? It's so important. Some fear there. Guilt, I still miss it. I still get frustrated, which I guess is like a maybe hurt and anger in the moment where I raise my voice or I say unfair things in response to their behavior. So I feel tons of guilt, big waves of guilt when that happens. And shame too, because I think I expect that I should be doing it perfectly. There's some part of me that still thinks that, like, I should be doing this perfectly by now. And putting that expectation on myself can then lead to kind of a shame spiral. So anytime I miss it with my kids and know it, you know, really quick, you're like, oh, that was bad. And then you go back and repair. Thankfully, we have repair, but it's still really painful. Joy, hearing my kids laugh, joy, watching them learn. The most joy, or tons of joy lately, is seeing their emotional intelligence. Like when they're able to say what's happening for them or able to kind of see what's happening for other people, tons and tons of joy that they are learning those skills at such a young age and that awareness at such a young age.
Love that.
Lots of joy that I get to hang out with little humans and I get to be part of their life is just a beautiful gift for me. A lot of fear in caretakers who are full-time caretakers, hearing, well, if you just floated around like Bridget and asked about the shorts, then it would be perfect, because I'm so aware of the fact that I'm not a full-time parent in this season of my life. And so there's a whole other extra thing that's happening there. Lonely, I think there's lonely in the assumption from full-time caretakers that people who aren't don't want to be included or don't want to assist. Guilt in some of the judgment that I've carried against parents, my own parents and just parents in the world.
Yeah.
Shame where I've missed it with kids. I have for sure missed it and not followed their energy and dishonored them.
Yeah.
Anger, that my understanding of anger as an emotion, I literally went to counseling for a year to learn how to be angry because I was the perfect kid that you wouldn't have, like never, I got in trouble like 3 times my whole childhood.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn like, oh, actually there is a sacred no, there is anger that is good and connecting and right for injustice. Just anger that didn't know that as a kid. Hurt, did I miss that? Not sure. I think the hurt probably goes with the lonely of what does it look like for us to create communities for children where you can add an extra seat to your table, where you can add more input, where you can just be willing to make the ask that says, I can't do it all by myself as a parent. I've got to let other people into this. And the vulnerability, I honor the vulnerability that is to say, I'm going to let you come close and I need you to be safe for my kiddos.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you. Thank you both for coming on today. This is such an important topic. Oh my gosh. For everyone listening, it is just so important that we are supporting these humans, that we are trying to grow into the next generation. And so thank you so much. I have joy because I'm looking at this core emotion wheel and there's syrup on it. So sorry, guys.
I just noticed it.
But I have joy because it's like, yeah, my kids, we use this all the time. Like,
Great.
and so sorry that there's syrup on it. And thank you to our listeners for showing up. Thank you for being on this journey with us so we can create more humans that are safe for each other and not placing judgment on situations for sure. So thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work with us. And we do all of this because
You need this.
You deserve this.
so let's do this.